So about a week ago, I went for a walk around 6 p.m. as I usually do. But it was dark out, and where I live, it's pretty quiet. I start walking out of my side of the street, and at the end, there's a police car parked off to the side of the pavement. I walked on the opposite side and began walking towards a long road that has huge open fields near it. As I'm walking, I notice the car is behind me, and at first, I think nothing of it. It was pitch black and his lights were off, so that seemed strange, but still I looked past it because he was a cop. He drives past me and parks his car in the car park at the end of the road, the car facing me with the lights on so I couldn't see the car or who was in it. Now, bear in mind, I wasn't dressed suspiciously. I mean, I looked very presentable and just like your average Joe. I didn't have my hood up and I was wearing fairly bright high-endish clothes. Nothing too crazy or posh, but I was certainly nothing to be worried about. So, when I get to the car, I take a left that leads down an industrial estate. That's a long road and is usually fairly quiet with a few places still open. So, I walk down there and it was then that I realized that the car was following me. Every place there was to pull in, the car would drive past me and wait for me to pass it. And still, it would park facing me with its lights on. This went on for some time. Just the car driving past me, pulling in and watching me. I get to the end of the industrial estate, and at this point, I was fairly aware that the car was following me, so decided to try and lose them. I cross the road and casually walk onto this path, surrounded by trees, so he couldn't see or follow me. This path leads to a school, and I get to the school, and guess who's there waiting for me? With lights glaring in my face. Yeah, that same police car. And now, I definitely know that he's following me. I take a right that leads up towards a more popular part of my village, and near a couple of shops and food chains. I get there and the car is nowhere to be seen. So, I walk back towards my house, and as I get to the end of the street, there it was, waiting in the same spot as when I first left my house. I walked past the side of the car and there was a man driving who just looked at me really creepily and smiled. He was watching me, eyes locked, all the way past his car until I couldn't see him and he couldn't see me anymore. So I get home and go to bed thinking, what the hell just happened? The next day, around the same time, I go for a walk, planning on taking the same route as last time. Just as a bit of backstory, I walk every day. Or at least almost every day. It's just something I enjoy doing. So, I get to the end of my street, and you guessed it, the same car was parked in the same spot. So now, I know something is definitely up. I walk the exact same route, and he follows me just as he did last time. The same method of driving past me, and then parking up ahead of me, with lights in my face. I don't know why he's following me, and still can't think of any reason that he'd have to follow me. I mean, I have no enemies and keep myself to myself. I'm not involved in any crime or anything. But the car follows me all the way home, just the same as the night before, and when I get to the end of my street, he was parked in the same place and gave me the same look. Only this time, it was even more chilling. I didn't walk the day after, and I haven't been out since. I'm going to go out for a walk tomorrow and see if I see the car. But what do you guys think I should do? This takes place this summer after my freshman year of college, around 2014. I was a cashier at a large Walmart on a busy shopping center street. I knew the area, even though I lived in a small town about 40 minutes away. The drive, it didn't bother me too much, since my mum and I went to this area pretty much every weekend anyway. As a generally polite but a soft-spoken 19-year-old female at the time, I happened to ease most co-workers into at least liking me at first. My personality is generally about harmony, and this was before I had completely developed the backbone to stand up for myself. Even now, I'm still working on it. Now, if you think I thought I'd be a target for creepers, the answer was no. I wasn't a cocky thing, thinking I could take on the world. I was just a larger girl. Back then, I thought creepers only hit on small and really pretty girls, so I didn't think they would care. I realize being female is enough for some people, and everyone has their own varying definition of someone to like genuinely, and someone to creep on, but I just thought the odds were stacked against me, so to speak. By this point, I had been used to speaking with co-workers of all sorts of walks of life. One man in particular, who often flagged me down when I was nearby, was this older Jamaican man. At least, I believe, because that seemed to be his accent. The guy must have been in his early 40s. He was thin and not terribly tall, maybe 5'11". He was always smiling and socializing with people, whenever he wasn't pushing carts. I, of course, would talk with him, on the way in or out of work, or whenever he managed to catch me. Conversations with him always felt a tad awkward, since I had a difficult time understanding his accent. Truthfully, I wasn't the kind of person to blame him for this, though. I just generally felt guilty for not understanding him. Though, as a few weeks passed, his accent became easier to pinpoint. One day, I came in for a later shift. He walks up with me to the entrance of the store, asking the usual things that are normal for Walmart co-workers. How are you? When do you get out? Are you going to be working tomorrow? It was as we were about to part that he handed me a piece of paper. I looked at it, realizing that he gave me a phone number. He told me to call him when I got off work, smiling expectantly. My brain froze, not instantly sure how to process the information. I wasn't a thinking on my feet kind of gal like most of my friends, and this had never happened to me before. Yet, he kept his expectant gaze, and my brain just stayed in a standstill. Okay, I reluctantly murmured. Satisfied, he walked off. Dread coursed all over as I made my way to the back room. My entire shift was spent nervously trying to think of how to approach this. I wasn't going to call the guy, and I didn't want him knowing my number. I mean, I didn't even know him. But why would he want my number except for an interest in me? He's way too old for me, though. Was he taking my kindness as a sign that I liked him? I mean, I was nice to everyone. All this did was increase my anxiety, and I didn't call him that night. The next day, he caught me, just as I was in the entrance of the building. Looking back, I'm thankful that it was where there were people. He was fuming, demanding to know why I hadn't called him. I made an excuse that I was just really busy. He smiled again, just telling me that he understood and to not forget to call him tonight when I got off of work. I looked towards my shoes, and he waited until I nodded before leaving. Once again, I had anxiety most of the shift, and I still didn't call him. Thankfully, he wasn't on my next few shifts, and my next shift that he was on was earlier in the day. He tried to wave to me from a distance, but I acted like I didn't see him, and managed to get inside before he could get anywhere near me. Around this time, I was moved to the garden center to help them out with cashiering. I also was taught basics on caring for the plants, and honestly, This was a lot of fun, and the people out here were even cooler than up in the main area. But the only problem was, well, garden centres are right up against the parking lot, and half of the garden centre was outside where he could interact with me. I was lucky enough, though, that some of the other girls were working on the plants, and I had plenty of customers to keep me busy inside. My shifts were semi-random, and this night I got out at 11 p.m. We were instructed to park in the back of the lot so that customers had the front zones. The parking lot strips were even colour coordinated for us. At this time of night, my car was one of the only remaining ones out back. At the time, I drove a 1996 Buick Park Avenue. It stood out against other cars, and most people of my age group saw it as an old person's car. But man, did I love that thing. And apparently, my cart pusher co-worker had taken to remembering it already. Because even though I wasn't the only person exiting the store at 11, he knew to wait around its vicinity. I didn't notice him at first, but as I was walking, I eventually caught sight of his bright yellow vest. I power walked it to my car and locked the door, and he continued to stride up to the car as I turned it on. I wasn't sure what to do at the time. Part of me was really uncomfortable and nervous that he'd yell at me or something. Yet, my polite nature was too strong, and I freaking wait for the guy. I double-checked that my door is locked, and I rolled down the window a small bit. It's enough to where I can talk to him, but he'd struggle to reach inside, if you catch my drift.
"Hi, are you just getting out?"
he asks. I'm surprised that he didn't start off aggressive. Yeah, and you?"
Well, I'm out for another hour. I've been meaning to ask you something. How old are you?"
I blink slowly, completely thrown off. My brain has no time to think of any excuse or lie. 19. Why? The words came out uneasily, and then he just smiles and lets out this casual, happy-go-lucky tone.
"Oh, I just love you."
I look back and forth, and then back at him. Pardon?
"I love you."
At this point, I just want to get out of there immediately. Thanks. I gotta go, okay?
"Sure, I'll see you soon, okay?"
he says cheerfully. But somehow, that statement scared me. I try not to rip out of there, but go calmly, feeling his gaze still watching me. But honestly, I'm kind of on the verge of panic now. So I go into our rival store's parking lot and proceed to freak out. I call a friend that I'm close to at the time, who I know tends to stay up late, and is a rational personality type. I tell him everything, crying and shaking wildly. As the fear spills out, I begin to wonder, what would happen if we got out at the same time? Would he follow me home? I don't want him knowing where I live. And what does he want with me? My friend, meanwhile, is really calm and promises to stay on the line with me. He admits that he has no experience with this kind of stuff. But then I remember one of my longtime friends does. Only she's a little difficult to get a hold of on the phone. He isn't really close to her, but he assures me that he'll try to get a hold of her through Skype. He manages to keep talking to me the whole 40-minute drive home, and when I get back, he tells me that he's managed to contact her and that she'll be calling me in a few minutes. She listens to me and tells me that she understands why I'm a bit scared, even in my own room. She used to have a full-on stalker, and she advises me to tell Walmart management. I'm a little worried about getting him into too much trouble at this point because, honestly, he hasn't done too much. But she tells me that the behavior it isn't appropriate and that he might be inclined to do something that he shouldn't do if it's just let to sit. I agree, and the next day I catch my boss to tell her. She listens and is rational about it, but understands and helps me file a report. She tells me that he does have the right to know about the report, and it might be a he said, she said sort of deal. That, and I didn't have the paper with his number anymore. I felt a bit uneasy, but I decided to go forward with the report in the end. That day, I'm working at the garden centre with 3 of my favourite people. The only guy out of the group is a fairly tall and easygoing guy called Brendan. Now, Brendan tends to be the one who stacks and deals with a lot of the crazier outdoor equipment. He also was the one who took the time to show me how to care for most of the plants. While I was outside, Mr. I Love You tries to come over and wave me down with a friendly smile. I turn and just go right inside, bundling up my anxiety. I was kind of worried what would happen at the end of my shift, and am nearly on the verge of tears, imagining terrible possibilities. Brendan notices that I'm off and asks if I'm alright. I reluctantly ask him when he gets out, and he says that he gets out an hour before I do, but he's sticking around a while waiting for his girlfriend, who gets out an hour after me. I ask if he'd be willing to walk me to my car, without telling him why. Despite the fact that I give no indication about Mr. I Love You, Brendan asks about him, and my surprise gives Brendan the non-verbal yes. He begins to tell me as well that Mr. I Love You is bothering one of our other co-workers. She reluctantly was thinking of reporting him too, apparently. She likes her privacy and preferred to eat in her car instead of the break room. However, lately, he's taken up to staring at her while she eats her entire break. He kept doing this every time that they had a shift together too, until she just couldn't stand him doing it anymore. She was older than me, about Mr. I Love You's age in fact, but much smaller and your average 40-year-old woman in physical appearance. I guess the only requirement for his attention is that you're female. Brendan agreed to meet me after my shift was over and walk me to my car. Mr. I Love You stayed very far away at this point, staring at both of us while Brendan walked me over. I thanked him, and Brendan was sure to stare right back at the guy while I got in my car and I left. I believe that Walmart received multiple complaints about this guy, and this is what led them to tell him to just leave us be. And thankfully, he complied. I noticed him pass me a few times when I was back in the main checkout lines, but he refused to make eye contact with me. Not too much after this, though, he just straight up disappeared. I don't know if he was fired or left, but I'm glad that I haven't seen him since. A few years later, I received a message from my rational friend who I called that night. The creeper told me that he loved me. We weren't as close anymore, so honestly, I was surprised to hear from him. He apologized profusely, admitting that he never took me seriously that night. I was pretty amazed, reassuring him that he kept me calm and contacted someone who could help me. And that's all I needed out of him at the time. He told me, though, that a girl that he was close to had gotten in a similar situation that I had recently, only it ended far worse for her. He thought back to that night that I called him and realized that something horrible could have happened to me, and that the fact that this guy was following me, trying to talk to me every second, and even strangely said that he loved me, were all very bad signs of a stalker or possibly something worse. And the fact that he's just up and gone now and that nobody really knows where he is not a very good sign. Anyway, it's been some years now since this all happened, but I still sometimes find myself looking over my shoulder, in a dark car park. So, I'm an Australian, and in Australia, we don't really have any Bigfoot or Sasquatch, so this is a bit odd. However, the Aboriginals here do believe in things called quinkin, or hairy men, which are tall, maybe 6'5", and covered in hair. When I was about 9, my family moved from Darwin to Cairns, which are very far apart, roughly 3,000 kilometres off-road, and my little brother and mum decided to fly over, whilst me and my old man just decided to road trip it. It took about 4 days, because we stopped a lot to fish and shoot roos and stuff. One evening, we stopped to set up camp around the corner from a creek, far enough that crocodiles wouldn't munch us. We decided that we would sleep under the stars, because Central Northern Territory doesn't get too much rain. That night, the moon lit up the whole scrub. You could see shooting stars in every silhouette, and I went to sleep feeling comfy and calm in my swag, with the cold dry air blowing past us. Later on, though, I woke up because I heard footsteps and rustling near our camp. I looked over at my dad and said, "Hey Dad, did you hear that?" I was pretty terrified, to be honest, and I looked up, and maybe 100 meters from us, there were 3 tall hunched creatures just staring at us in our camp. Obviously, I started to really freak out. I saw my dad grab the gun out of its case and was loading it when the things started to slowly move towards Dad. Being cautious that it wasn't just people, he fired a shot into the air to warn them. A side note, Central Northern Territory is scary because a lot of people have been just straight old bushwhacked there, so you can understand his caution. But they ignored my dad and just kept coming, faster. My dad bolted in a new round and said, "Oi, stop!" and then fired at one of the creatures, and it slumped and ran off with the other 2 into the scrub. My heart was pounding and I was totally paralyzed with fear. Dad came back and said to get some sleep, then turned on the floodlights on his old Hilux and sat up for the rest of the night. Obviously, I didn't sleep that night though. I really don't know what they were or what I saw. All I know is that it wasn't human. I do a fair bit of work on the cattle stations around the top of Queensland, and to this day, I refuse to sleep outside of a locked workers' quarters. I have no idea what they were. This happened to me a few years ago. I worked second shift at the time, getting off at midnight, and would sometimes hit up Denny's after work for a late night dinner. One night, I'm sitting in a booth, reading my book and eating dinner, when I look up and notice a guy at another table, sitting by himself and looking at me. I didn't think much of it since he could have just been people watching or something, but we make eye contact and he looks away. A little while later, I look up and this guy is staring at me again. And the same thing happens. Eye contact and he looks away. At this point, my instincts start to twig a bit. But he hasn't come over to me or anything, so I just let it go, finish eating and get up to pay at the register. He immediately gets up to pay right behind me though. And now, I'm starting to get a little creeped out. So, after I pay, I move over to the side and pretend to be looking for something in my purse. He lingers for a second, then leaves the building. I wait a few minutes to leave, cursing myself that I parked over at the side of the building instead of the windowed front. If this happened today, I'd probably ask an employee to walk me out, but I was young and didn't want to inconvenience anyone. So, I walk out to my car on high alert and get in, and suddenly, he pulls his car in next to mine and starts to get out. I'm really freaked out at this point, so I quickly hit my door locks and back out of my parking space. There are two ways to exit this lot. A driveway a few feet away, going directly onto the service road, which would take me right past his car. Or I can go around the building and cross over into the next door Waffles House parking lot and exit through their driveway. I choose to go around the building, and this guy jumps back into his car and starts following me. I'm panicking now, and I don't know what to do. I don't want to go home, as I don't want this guy to know where I live. In hindsight now, I would drive to the police station, but didn't think of it at the time. Luckily, though, there's that Waffle House next door with a front wall full of windows and a parking space right in front. I pull into the spot, jump out of my car, and literally run into the building. I look back outside and see that his car is stopped behind mine, and there's this just enraged look on his face. At this point, I'm shaking and nearly hyperventilating. The waitresses, and seriously, bless them, ask me what's wrong, and I kind of stutter out that I think I'm being followed. One of the waitresses comes around the corner, stands next to me, and just stares down this car creep until he drives off. And then she sits me in a booth and gives me a cup of coffee, telling me to wait a while before heading home. I left about 20 minutes later, and I swear I watched every car on the road to make sure that this guy wasn't following me. I never went back to the area after work again, though I did write a thank you note to the waitresses and dropped it off during the day. Honestly, this whole thing scared the shit out of me. But to this day, the thing that makes me angry about it was, after telling some friends what happened, a couple of them tried to convince me that he just thought that I was cute and wanted to talk to me. No. They didn't see this guy's face when I got to safety. He wanted to hurt me, but thankfully, he didn't get the chance. This happened to me about 2.5 years ago. I was 19 at the time. I'm only 5'2.5". And yes, the half-inch matters when you're this damn short. I'm a female. I had moved to Seattle from a small town in California. My dad had always raised me to be aware of my surroundings, and taught me how to defend myself at a young age. I knew if something bad happened, I would at least go down fighting. Seattle is a generally beautiful area, depending what part you're in, that is. It's a big city, so it's an eclectic melting pot of any kind of human that you can imagine. Rich, poor, unstable, successful, beautiful, disgusting, rude, kind. Basically any adjective, then antonym for it, could describe the kind of people that live there. Gunshots were a frequent noise. Sketchy glances from people with drug-induced sniffles were tossed around daily. There are track marks, like speed bumps in a school lot, on the arms of some hazy-eyed lost souls that wander around bus stops and bars. You couldn't go into a store without seeing someone steal something, or at least attempt to. Someone was always talking to themselves, at least 20 feet away from you most of the time if you were in a populated area. Anyone that's from Seattle can tell you that there is a high rate of severely mentally ill people wandering around, filtering in and out of the justice system, instead of getting mental help or medication. It was October. Seattle notoriously rains on and off, so a big black hooded jacket in my backpack was always a must. I liked keeping my hood up for the general rule of thumb that weirdos don't really mess with weirdos. But this night was different, and I hadn't brought my normal nighttime creep attire. What I was wearing doesn't mean that I deserve to be harassed, but dressing like a creep at night saved me from anyone wanting to interact most of the time, so it was just something that I did to be more comfortable and look less approachable. This night, I had worn a dress and forgot a jacket, so I looked really put together and friendly. I probably also looked stupid since it was October and I didn't have a jacket. My friend had moved into my home to escape an abusive ex from our tiny town. She was just as short as me, and we were often told that we looked like sisters. We decided to go downtown for her first adventure since moving in, and that was our first mistake. We got downtown around 10 p.m., thanks to public transportation. And that was fine because in Seattle, the bus runs late, so we had a way home. Window shopping wasn't an option though, because our stores had pretty much been closed at that point. Around 10 p.m., during a weeknight, most sit-in fast food were closing and it was the end of the month, so we couldn't afford anything but that. I googled where a McDonald's that was still open on the inside was so that we could get 2 burgers. It was an hour walk from where we were, so we decided to head off in that direction. As we got further and further towards our destination, the lights became more scarce, and the area looked more and more seedy as we passed buildings. And my phone went black, just pretty much out of nowhere. I had an iPhone, so it really was not surprising because that piece of shit was always on the fritz. My friend also only had a flip phone, so it was useless in terms of directions. We decided to just keep walking though, and hope that we find our destination by luck. And that was our second mistake. We walked and walked for what felt like a lifetime, and still nowhere to eat. Fuck, we were hungry. By now, we were in a shittily lit area across the street from a bar, and we hear a guy cussing, yelling and freaking out. People started yelling back at him, telling him to get the hell away from them and go somewhere else. We started laughing because this guy was clearly on drugs or had way too much to drink, acting like a total loon. There was power in their numbers though, because the creep passed to the side of the street that we were on after being scared off by 10 or more people, and our laughter stopped upon noticing that he was headed in our direction. Our hearts sank and he yelled,
Hey, slow down. Nice legs.
Of course, that was enough to make us speed up.
Hey, I'm talking to you bitches.
Bellowed from what I assume was around 10 feet behind us. We start going faster and I opened my knife and held it in the palm of my hand, near my side so it was a bit hidden. I looked at my friend and told her to dial 911 as we were at a fast-paced jog now. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and in that moment, I knew that if anything happened, it would be solely on me to protect us. Everyone has fight or flight, but people forget to mention that the third option is freeze. Some people just don't make any action at all, and that's their natural reaction to fear. He caught up to us and he grabbed her arm. I managed to pry his hand off her arm by pushing him with all my might, still holding my pocket knife in my other hand. Staggering backwards from being pushed, he started coming towards us.
Call the cops now,
I said. But she didn't. She just looked at me like a deer in headlights, and that's when I could feel him behind me. I pushed her away and told her to walk the other way, but instead, she just stood behind me, fucking petrified. Fear consumed her ability to move, and she was just totally stuck. He was mumbling, calling us names for ignoring him when he was giving us compliments, according to him. That's when he lunged at me, and I pulled my knife out into plain sight, not being hidden in my hand anymore. I put it to his red sweater. A side note, if you're wondering what he looked like, he had a peppered, very long, scraggly beard. His lips were chapped and scabbed. He had beady eyes and long dark hair that looked wet, and all his clothes were dirty and torn, and his scent could gag a maggot. After looking at my knife on him, he spit on my face and called me names. I just started stabbing in the air since there was spit all over my face and my vision wasn't awesome since I had stranger saliva in my eyes. I was yelling at him as loud as I could to draw attention to myself, and my friend was still cowered behind me. He took off at that point, speed walking the other direction back towards the bar as I told my friend to call the cops again. I wiped the spit off my face, and she looked at me, bewildered and ghost white. I just grabbed her phone out of her hands and called myself. The 911 operator was totally useless. I told her my location and description, and she just sarcastically asked how they would find him if he walked away, and that my description was like a lot of people that frequent downtown. The dispatcher told me that I needed to stay there or no one would bother to check out the scene without a witness. That wasn't comforting at all. I told her that I would stay though and wait for an officer. My friend though begged me to leave, but all that kept running through my mind was that what if he comes after people that would freeze the way that she did? What if he came after someone without a knife or anything to defend themselves? I needed to wait for a cop. We hid behind a building, but inside of traffic, and peeking behind the building, we could see that he was pacing up and down the street, looking all around. 20 minutes passed, and there's no cop, so I call again. She tells me that they're on their way. 45 minutes passed. No cops. I called again, and they say that we told you that we're on our way. 1 hour later, and my friend convinced me to leave, otherwise we would miss the last bus. We made it home safely, and I just cooked dinner. And 2.5 hours later, I looked at my friend's phone that I had left in the living room as I cooked. There was a missed call from what I suppose was the police department. I didn't even bother calling back. You know, something horrible could have happened to us within that time, and no one even showed up. The cops drove by us, and I even tried to flag one down, but he just turned on his lights and started following someone through a stoplight. The man was probably long gone by then, and honestly, the dispatcher's sarcastic tone about my description really made me feel like, yeah, he does look like your run-of-the-mill bum, so who will care enough to find him over this? So, in the end, nothing happened, and I feel like we may have had a narrow escape.